Willie, we're just listening to Caddy on Way Too Early, talking about how Donald Trump sort of plays it by ear. The people around him talk about how, he'll go out, he'll say he's going to do something, see how it works out, and then move around. Anybody that's read the first 3 pages of Art of the Deal know that's what he says he does. He shows up in his office, he sits down, he takes phone calls, and he sees how things are going to shake out. I'm sure he also was looking at the markets yesterday, pre-market trading. And so we get this, of course, Wall Street Journal talking about how the trade deal is delayed, certainly on Mexico and Canada, our 2 closest trade allies. And, of course, with Mexico, we got a positive deal. And Mexico feels like they got a positive deal. Fentanyl, stop fentanyl coming to the United States, and the United States does its best to stop high-capacity guns going to Mexico. So, sort of this standoff. Both sides can claim victory. The Wall Street Journal, actually, lead editorial, which we're going to talk about in a second, says President Trump blinks, but of course, that's not what his supporters are saying right now.
Yeah, and that Art of the Deal style works in New York real estate or if you're hosting a reality show. But when you're the president of the United States, it tends to throw the world into a bit of chaos. Now, his side and he are arguing that big tariff announcement got him to a place where he wanted to be, which was to push Mexico into a corner and get them to make concessions on the border. Same goes for Canada. But meanwhile, the markets and our international relations suffer for it. And also now we're talking about China, because President Trump's 10% tariff on all Chinese goods now is in effect, and China has retaliated immediately, announcing overnight a series of measures, including its own levies on American products. Beginning on February 10th, China will impose an additional tariff of 15% on coal and liquefied natural gas, and a 10% tariff on other items like crude oil and agricultural machinery. But, Mika, so this is what everyone expected, of course, an escalation from whoever you put the tariffs on, whether it's Mexico or Canada or China. Again, the president saying this is basically a negotiating tactic, and we'll see if it turns out to be that way in China's case as well.
And was the deal that was struck with Canada a deal that we've seen before? President Trump is backtracking on 25% tariffs for Canadian and Mexican goods. Now, the move comes after the leaders of Canada and Mexico announced plans to ramp up security at their borders to help combat the transport of drugs and illegal immigrants into the U.S. Regarding Canada, Trump posted on social media yesterday the tariffs would be paused for 30 days to see if a final economic deal can be reached with the country. Additionally, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau revealed Canada would implement a $1.3 billion plan to reinforce the border with new technology equipment and nearly 10,000 frontline personnel to coordinate with the U.S. to stop the flow of fentanyl. One interesting note, Trudeau's announcement yesterday was a repeat of the same border plan the Canadian government unveiled in December during the Biden administration. And earlier yesterday, Mexico's president announced that her nation would immediately reinforce its northern border with 10,000 National Guard members to address drug trafficking. Trump stated the U.S. will continue negotiations with Mexico over border security during the 30-day tariff delay.
You know, Mika, an interesting thing happened yesterday during the president signing ceremony inside the White House. Rupert Murdoch was there.
Yeah.
And somebody asked what he thought about the Wall Street Journal editorial page, calling this the dumbest, I think the dumbest trade war ever. And he said, sometimes I don't agree with the Wall Street Journal editorial page. Today would be one of those days as well. Because, of course, the Wall Street Journal editorial page, like most economists and people that read the Wall Street Journal, have long been opposed to the idea of tariffs. And so in its latest editorial titled Trump Blinks on North American Tariffs, that editorial board writes in part this: If North American leaders need to cheer about a minor deal so they can all claim victory, that's better for everyone. The need is especially important for Mr. Trump, given how much he boasted that tariffs are a foolproof diplomatic weapon against friend or foe. Mr. Trump can't afford to look like the guy who lost. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, in particular, seems to recognize this, and so far she's playing her Trump cards with skill. None of this means that tariffs are some genius power play, as the Trump media chorus is boosting, writes the Wall Street Journal editorial page, certainly about other people within their own media conglomerate, News Corp. But they go on and write, Mr. Trump's weekend tariff broadsides against a pair of neighbors has opened a new era of economic policy uncertainty that won't calm down until the president does. As he warned many times before Election Day, this is the biggest economic risk of Donald Trump's second term. And that's what, as they warned beforehand. And Caddy, I thought it was very interesting, your take again, politically, on how this was all going to go down. There were people that were close to Donald Trump who always had said, it's always an opening bid. If he talks about 25% tariffs, it's an opening bid. And I spoke to some people at the White House yesterday, and also some supporters of his yesterday who laughed and said, we told you so, we told you so. He was never going to impose 25% tariffs on Canada or Mexico, which seems to line up with what you say. He'll talk about it, he'll put it out there, but if things start going south, if the stock market drops, he's going to find his way out of there.
Yeah, and the timing was interesting, right? We saw the stock market open. We saw it drop in that first half hour or so. It fell by about 500-600 points. It didn't look good. The market wasn't happy. And quite quickly, we got an announcement following that from Mexico that there had been a resolution. Immediately, the market bounced back up again. That's what the White House would like to see. Now, maybe the president was gambling that if he announced this on Friday, by Monday, the markets would be happy with this. There is still the question of what happens in 30 days. And there's the longer-term question of if you are now Canada or Mexico, who, by the way, have not really given up very much to get this pause. I mean, I think Canada is sending a border czar. That's it. The rest of their program they'd already announced. Same with Mexico. Then has to some extent the damage been done, even by the announcement of this? Is there a feeling that if you can, you're going to diversify your relationships, your trade relationships, to the extent that it is possible, make those more friction-free, because you don't know whether in 30 days actually Donald Trump will decide he is going to impose these tariffs, and the EU, who've already been put on notice by Donald Trump over the weekend, even to some extent the UK, they're now going to have to go through this same process as well. So whether or not this leads to an immediate tariff war right now, there is an eroding of relationships that have benefited the United States. I feel like I know I'm preaching to the converted here, Joe, and I don't need to tell you this. These relationships and these trading relationships have benefited the United States enormously for the past 30, 40, 50 years. Do other countries with Donald Trump in power for the next 4 years start thinking, OK, we do need to try to do something to weaken our reliance on the United States and look elsewhere?
Right. Yeah, Jonathan, though, let me just say, though, this is a powerful, potent political issue for Donald Trump. And I can say firsthand, when I was running in 1994, I was shocked. At one point, I went over to the rural part of my district into Funiac Springs, and I was talking about tax cuts and balanced budgets and a strong national defense and a rising China and what the United States needed to do. Every question was about NAFTA, national sovereignty, NAFTA. It was NAFTA. If I could think back to '94, and this is the world we still live in, if you look at Donald Trump's face, it was about NAFTA, it was about GATT, it was about the World Trade Organization. And anybody in the media that looked at what Donald Trump was saying yesterday in the White House, in the Oval Office, and didn't think that was connecting with the rank and file base saying, you know, we need to push them harder here. We need to push them harder there. He talked about Germany. He said, hey, we've got a lot of BMWs and Mercedes that are going around, driving around in the United States. You don't see any Chevys in Berlin, do you? That sort of talk. You know, Dick Gephardt used it in the Democratic Party. You have populists in both parties using it. I'm just saying, we all understand what the Wall Street Journal editorial page says, what Steve Ratner's about to say. But Democrats need to understand this is a powerful, potent issue when you talk about economic nationalism.
Yeah, there's no doubt Trump, for a long time now, has had his finger on the pulse of economic nationalism, economic populism, and he believes the tariffs are a way to do that. Now, as Katie said, there's a risk, there's a downside here. These are two of the United States' closest allies, and there's some real hard feelings. We heard Prime Minister Trudeau talk over the weekend, a real sense of betrayal that the United States would do this, considering how Canada has come to the U.S.'s aid time and time again in times of need. So we will see what that relationship looks like going forward, even as this crisis briefly passes. As someone put it to me yesterday, close to President Trump, at the end of the day, it is showbiz. Like, this is something he is going to make a show. He's going to claim some sort of win, even if there aren't really significant changes. Some Mounties at the border up north. And we should note the 10,000 troops the Mexican government has agreed to place at the southern border of the United States. It's exactly the same deal they gave President Joe Biden back in 2021. So that also familiar, not breaking new ground, but at least in the short term, Joe and Mika, an economic win. The issue will be, as that same person close to the president put it to me yesterday, is how much risk is Trump going to be willing to take with the markets? We saw them open up badly yesterday. You know, this was just a one-day trade war, you know, if you will. Trump reaching those agreements with Mexico and Canada, both before the closing bell. The markets recovered somewhat. Right. But is he going to want to do that again in 30 days or 30 days after that or 30 days after that when he stakes his popularity and success to Wall Street?
Yeah, and I will say, even after we backed down on Canada and Mexico as a nation, as the Wall Street Journal Business and Finance page say, steelmakers are hiking prices ahead of tariffs right now. And Willie, again, that you know, it reminds me a lot of the campaign where, you know, I sat here, I won't talk about everybody else, I sat here talking about how the United States economy was the envy of the world, how jobless rates were at record lows over a period of time, how the dollar was, how all of these positive things were going out there. Americans weren't feeling it. They weren't feeling it because of inflation, because of rising gas prices, grocery prices up 20-25% over the past 4 years. That's when I talk about this economic nationalism that is a strong sell in Middle America. We all know, we can all talk about tariffs, and especially against Canada and Mexico, how bad that would be for us, how bad that would be for consumers. But for a lot of Americans, they see economic wreckage since NAFTA was implemented back in 1994. So this is, again, it's a challenge for Democrats. It's a challenge for free trade Republicans. It's a challenge for people on the Wall Street Journal editorial page to make these arguments and explain to Americans who are economic nationalists what their view is and why tariffs against Mexico and Canada would be so short-sighted.
Yeah, despite what we know from economists, and we'll talk to Steve in a second here, about what tariffs do to cost to consumers in the United States, these moves were cheered during the campaign and then when he proposed them a couple of days ago by his supporters. One other note, as John mentioned, that the Biden administration had struck a deal with Canada. This deal that Canada announced yesterday in a response to the tariffs about what they're going to do at the border, 10,000 troops, stop fentanyl, more than $1 billion, was already put in place, negotiated with the Biden administration in December, and they sort of re-announced it yesterday to placate Donald Trump. So just fascinating management of the president here.